In Zimbabwe, Africa, on the 16th of September 1994, 62 pupils at the Ariel School witnessed at least one silver craft descend from the sky and land in a field near the school. Some of the children claimed creatures dressed all in black approached them and telepathically communicated a message about the environment. One student described them as having long arms and a crazy greenish oval-shaped head. Another, a young girl named Liesel, said, "I worry that the man is still looking at me and he's going to kill me." What really happened that September day? Did these children have a close encounter of the third kind? Hit the subscribe button and keep watching. Welcome back to America's Strangest History World Edition. I'm John Genoa, and I'm joined by my good friend and paranormal investigator, Jimmy Malloy.
Hey, everyone.
So, start us out. What the heck happened?
Well, John, let's start by talking about the area where this took place. It's a place called Ruwa, which is about 14 miles southeast of the Zimbabwean capital, Harare. It's an agricultural area mainly, but it also had this very expensive private school smack dab right in the middle.
That's the Ariel School.
Yes. Yep, that's the one. So most of the students that attend this school are actually from wealthy white families. 2 days prior to this incident, South Africa at large had actually seen a whole bunch of UFO sightings. Activity was off the charts in the days leading up to this incident. There have been numerous reports of bright fireballs passing through the skies at night all over the place.
That's really spooky. I want to point out that from my research, I saw that there were also a number of reports of a disc-like craft in the sky as much as 4 days leading up to the event. So people were seeing something.
Right, and we have a hotbed of activity, a whole flurry of activity leading up to the day that we're going to talk about right now, which I think is really compelling evidence as to what was seen that day.
Yeah.
So a local radio station in the area, ZBC, they even asked their listeners to call in and describe what they had been seeing. So this was noteworthy and newsworthy before the event we're even going to talk about at the Ariel School took place. Everybody was talking about it. There was buzz about it. Some people were saying it was a comet. Some said it was a meteor. Basically, no one was really sure what it was, but we had all of the classic explanations that flood in around when UFO sightings happen.
Yeah, nobody's sure, right?
Right.
But one guy, a guy named Brian Dunning, he said that they saw what they saw was re-entry of the Zenit 2 rocket from the Cosmos 2290 satellite launch. Basically,
right.
He's indicating the booster broke off, right? And that's what you're seeing, these burning streaks. That's what everybody's seeing.
Yeah, he had this really concrete explanation of this is exactly what you're seeing. It's this booster breaking up into, all these tiny little pieces or hundreds of a flurry of pieces, and you're seeing them streak across the sky. The only problem with that, which would be a plausible explanation for UFO sightings or aerial phenomenon, as we're known to call them now. But the problem there is that a lot of further reports that came in, actually detailed sightings of alien beings and specific crafts. So, the two aren't mutually exclusive of each other. Yes, you can explain away this part of the story, the aerial sightings, but we have people reporting sightings of actual beings on the ground. One young boy and his mom said that they saw aliens in the middle of the day, which doesn't happen with most of these sightings. And a trucker also reported seeing aliens right on the road in front of him. So what we're seeing is not normal activity that we're accustomed to seeing around UFO sightings. A lot of bizarre things are happening, which adds to, what we're going to talk about now.
A lot of independent witnesses, right?
Right.
So
right.
Independent witnesses, all within a very small time frame we're working here.
Right.
4 days leading up to the event and actually afterwards. Okay, so you can't really explain the whole thing away as the broken up rocket boosters or like SpaceX, right?
yeah.
Exactly. So
we wouldn't have a broken rocket booster with SpaceX because now we can catch the boosters. They come back down, right?
Yeah.
So you can't use that explanation anymore.
Which is pretty cool when you think about it.
It's unbelievable to watch, yeah.
Very Star Trek.
yeah.
So let's get to the Ariel School. What happened at Ariel?
Yeah, so at the Ariel School, it was mid-morning, the kids' mid-morning break at the school, so it must have been around 10 a.m. The kids are mostly hanging outside playing, kind of mulling about. Nothing too organized is going on right now at this time.
What were the teachers doing?
The teachers were actually inside having a pre-planned meeting at the time. So they had a meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. and that's where they were while the kids were outside.
I got it. So they were basically having a pre-planned meeting to discuss staging an alien landing.
Don't put that conspiracy
I'm sure
theory
it
out
wasn't
there.
that. Yeah, I know. I'm sure that wasn't it.
No, that's funny. But yeah, so the kids were basically alone at this point. They were outside, like I said, mulling about and kind of having their mid-morning activity and break. The incident reportedly took place over a span of about 15 minutes. When the kids later told their teachers, they kind of just ignored them and brushed it off to kids being kids and having, wild imagination.
Then what exactly happened? What did they experience?
Yeah, so 62 kids between the ages of 6 and 12 said they'd seen at least one UFO. Now that's 62, not one or two sightings or a sighting of a blurry photograph or, garbled video that we're used to seeing with these things. 62 eyewitnesses. Okay?
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Thank you. The kids described all the crafts as silver discs that appeared in the sky before floating down to a field of brush and small trees just next to the schoolyard where they were playing. But it gets crazy. According to the kids, by interviewing all 62, up to what we know to be about 4 creatures with big eyes, dressed completely in black, exited the craft and actually began to approach the kids in their outside yard.
Yeah, what I saw is that they described them as wearing like shiny black wetsuits.
Right.
And one was actually, I listened to all the interviews here, and I mean I listened to all the interviews, several hours of interviews. One apparently was positioned on top of the aircraft, apparently standing guard.
Mm-hmm.
Another was running in slow motion out of the woods towards the craft. I bet he stopped to take a leak. That's what happened.
He had to get out. He's like, "Hey, pull over anywhere.
Pull over.
I gotta go."
I don't care if we break the prime directive of Star Trek, by making contact with human beings. I have to take a pee.
Yeah, a lot of the kids, which we're going to get to later, soon in the story, when we start talking about the communication, a lot of people actually ascribed to what they were hearing. And again, I don't want to give anything away. We'll get to that. But they thought that creature on top of the craft was responsible for a lot of what we're going to hear later on. That guy standing on top of the craft is very popular in a lot of these interviews.
Let me ask you something. What would an average 6-year-old do, in your opinion, in this situation?
I don't see how, talk about a 6-year-old, I don't see how anybody doesn't turn and run the second that this is going on. This seems like observe this as some kind of invasion. I'm getting out of there. See you later, bro. They've landed and they're exiting the craft. Not a place I'm going to be.
What about a 6-year-old me?
A 6-year-old you is probably going to ask to go with them.
No. I would start that vigilante group we're always talking about. I'm just kidding.
A lot of the reactions of the children were to run. You asked how any of us would respond if we were 6-year-olds. Most of them ran. But some of the kids, obviously the more older of the bunch, they actually stayed to observe what was happening. I guess they were interested. The aliens, if that's what we want to call them at this point, is when they started actually telepathically communicating straight to the kid. In some of the reports, the aliens had an environmental message. And after that telepathic communication, they simply returned to their craft and flew off. That was it.
Environmental message. Now, what would you do if the sum and substance of that environmental message was to use paper straws? They warned of an impending climatic catastrophe. That's hard to say. Climatic catastrophe. Unequivocally linked to the moment we went back to using plastic straws.
That would be a problem.
I'd be like, I'm 6. What the hell are you talking about?
What's a paper straw? It's 1992. Exactly. We're not going to use paper straws for another 20 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, one of the 5th graders, he said he was warned that, quote, something was going to happen and that pollution mustn't be. An 11-year-old girl said she thought they wanted people to know that humans were harming the world and technology was their root cause. And boy, we really went the other way with that one after 1992.
Yeah.
Another kid said he was told that the world would end because we aren't taking care of the planet. So there's a common theme here and a common thread amongst all the kids that are telling this story. Now, before we get into some of the other theories about why people choose to either explain this away or what other theories that people that have looked back on this are saying that it might be, I want to highlight the thing that I find most interesting about this event, especially coming from a law enforcement perspective, is that you look at 62 different eyewitnesses, 62 children at that. or mostly children. I don't know if we're mixing in any other eyewitness testimony there, but we have a remarkable common thread among all of those stories. So the children were asked to draw pictures, and as we just said, they were asked what the aliens communicated to them. All of those messages are along the same lines, are pretty similar. And all of the pictures that these children drew were almost, if not an exact match, they were so similar in some of the details that they all drew. And all of these things are so common to overlap with each other. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen with eyewitness testimony, because eyewitness testimony is usually trash. You know as well as I do. Yeah. It's very unreliable. And with kids who aren't trained to take in information, aren't trained to observe things really, who knows how their minds operate in terms of absorbing information, it was remarkable the amount of overlap and common threads that these stories had, which I think really heavily lends it to the fact that these kids were telling the truth of something that they saw. I always found that very fascinating about this event. Yeah. Is this that the common overlap in all of the story. And these kids were separated. They were separated after it happened and interviewed one-on-one.
So they've got consistency
yes,
of stories.
Remarkably so. More so than most eyewitness testimony ever is. Especially in you dealing with children.
That's right.
It's something else. On that note, when they were questioned, the kids were adamant that it was not a plane that had landed. They flat out refused to be told that it was a plane that was landed. Interestingly, one researcher noted that the kids with different cultural backgrounds actually had different interpretations of what they'd seen. Not all of them thought they were aliens. They had a little bit differentiation there.
Okay. I wonder, who did they think they were talking to?
Some kids thought they were creatures known as tikloshes, which are short little creatures of local Shona and Ndebele folklore. Now, these creatures are malevolent beings that are called upon to kind of do evil and do evil tasks onto other people. They're these short little creatures in the folklore there. So some of the kids actually thought it was those, which I don't, how could you blame them?
I can see that. Reminds me of another video we did. But yeah, I can see falling back on cultural traditions to explain the inexplicable. Right. For instance, Sasquatch, right? There are a number of explanations of what Sasquatch could be in a number of different cultures.
Right. Well, that's what lends itself to the differentiation in the cultural backgrounds. Yeah. Based on what the kids saw.
That's right. Right. Exactly. Based on what they saw and their own cultural identity, right. they are going to be able. Some of them anyway may fall back on this as an explanation.
Right. Which is natural for kids to do.
Yeah. So what happened next?
So again, the teachers had dismissed it as, wild imaginations and games. So the kids obviously went home and told their parents. And it was the parents who took them seriously. Parents know their own children. They know when they're making stuff up and being silly versus when they're telling the truth, especially about something like this. Many of the parents came to the school the next day to speak to the teachers and the faculty to get to the bottom of it. It whipped up a ton of attention. News frenzy. Got featured on local radio. The BBC got involved. It really took off from there once they started involving the school faculty.
Would you be able to tell as a parent if either of your kids were lying, if they came to you with this story and were lying?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I'm sure some kids
polygraph machine?
No, but you can tell. There are normal tells when people are lying anyway, and kids don't really have the capacity to try and disguise their lies. They think that what they're telling you, if they're trying to lie to you, they think that what they're telling you is believable. So it's pretty easy usually to poke holes in it, or usually just with their lack of understanding, depending on how old they are, of anything in the world, they tell you things that just are incorrect. But they don't know that because they're kids.
So you would probe them with some follow-up questions and probably determine that whether they were lying.
It doesn't usually take a lot of probing. It's as simple as they can just tell you a completely incorrect fact about something that you know to be true, and they just don't know that because they're kids. But you can also tell the difference, when your kid's being serious and saying, "Look, I saw this thing." You can see the difference in their mannerisms and their behavior than when they're just making something up and being silly and having fun. You can tell a difference in them for sure.
Okay.
So in the middle of all this media frenzy, we have a BBC reporter named Tim Leach. He actually went to the school to interview the kids. He's responsible for a lot of the interviews that happened. And afterwards, he said that he could handle war zones. He was a war zone reporter, a battlefield reporter. He could handle doing all that stuff. He said this one really got to him.
Wow. Real war zones or like Counter-Strike? Like how affected was this guy?
He said that this one he just couldn't handle. He must have been really shaken by it. Another researcher, Cynthia Hines, stopped by and spoke to the kids too. She had them, this is what I was talking about before, she had them draw pictures of what they'd seen. And she noted that all the kids told her the same, very similar story. So let's take a clip of some of those interviews with the kids and see what they had to say.
Fungi, what do you imagine is his reason for visiting Earth?
I think it's about something that's going to happen.
Something that's going to happen?
What I thought was maybe the world's going to end. Maybe they're telling us the world's going to end. I think they want people to know that we're actually making harm on this world and we mustn't get too technologized.
How did that get communicated to you?
I don't really know, but it just popped up in my head.
Pollution.
He never said anything. It's just that the face has the eyes.
I actually watched the full-length original interviews, as I said, with all of the students. It took me a while to watch it. Very compelling. Very compelling. The students, they don't appear to be lying, and their stories were consistent, I will point out, up through adulthood, I should say. And
right, yeah.
Many of them are still...
They still discuss it, yeah.
Sticking to the story, so to speak.
Something that one of the kids said, and it really stayed with me in the way that she said it. A girl named Emma described the aliens as having huge eyes that you just can't not look towards. She went on to say that once we got that eye connection, everything else around us just disappeared. That's when I started feeling messages. The ideas just came across over into me, into my being. It wasn't talking. It was almost telepathic. It was just a feeling. This overwhelming feeling of how important the environment is.
I mean, I'm going to point out that I do believe in telepathy. I, when I was in grad school, participated in a research lab, and we published results dealing with telepathy. The concept is that thought itself, just our thinking, is essentially the flow of electrons. And electrons are moving from your mind, from, passing through, going into this bottle, going into, you and back all the time. And we determined that proximity is a key factor. Some of these electrons, which form your thoughts, can maintain a level of cohesion, and that thought can then transfer to the other person. That was the theory that we were testing in that research lab.
Well, that would make sense. A study like that would make complete sense when you think of it in terms of that, the actual science of it, that an advanced race or advanced beings, much more developed than we would be, would have mastery of something like that. When it's actually rooted and based in a scientific explanation like that, it would make perfect sense that these things that are way more advanced than us would have the ability to use that.
That's right. Or you can just say, yeah, whether technologically or whether biologically advanced in so much as they have evolved, you know, and to
learn,
that level, right?
Right. Absolutely. Well, it's not far-fetched at all to think that.
Yeah. Well, the Ariel School, I think that it's kind of almost poetic. It's called the Ariel School, right? When we're dealing with an aerial phenomenon, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Well, it's now become one of the most famous UFO cases ever to take place in Africa. I might say ever in the world. I think it is especially due to the amount of witnesses and independent recollections.
One of the most well documented, for sure.
Yes, well said. An episode of BBC's Witness History, they called it one of the most significant events in UFO history. They stole that from me.
Right. But that's not to say it doesn't have its detractors, because they are out there. One person said the kids had confused it with a touring puppet show. Another said the kids had misidentified a dust devil. So there are people out there that are trying to explain this away, despite the amount of documentation and evidence, positive evidence that there exists on it.
A dust devil, like the Tasmanian devil creates, right?
Sure.
When he goes around like that.
That just looks exactly like an alien and its craft. Yeah.
And a guy running like an alien.
Yeah,
Remember,
right.
I said an alien was running to the aircraft through the woods
Yeah.
in slow motion. Another one was on top, standing guard, is what they got the impression. So a dust devil could possibly do that. Maybe
Of course.
if the dust devil made contact with the whole group of students and you know, injured their, you know, maybe created some kind of,
Sure, why not?
maybe, I'm just thinking, maybe a dust devil or a big wind blew through you know, a field of peyote, and that spread across the children.
Maybe, and they all got a common thread of what they were seeing, yeah.
Yeah, but even that, like I'm saying, these are amazing lengths people can go to discredit a UFO sighting. Hardcore skeptics. It doesn't even make any sense.
Right. But having said that, there is a possible explanation that's been cited in a Netflix documentary about the case called Encounters. A former student called Dallin said he was behind the incident. He admitted he took the blame for it. He said he lied to classmates that a shiny rock that he could see in the distance was a UFO, and what happened next was just a case of mass hysteria. Again, regardless of what this kid is saying, I mean, completely plausible, but I don't find how you have a common thread of stories, drawings, and depictions of these things that all stand up to across 62 different stories when that's your explanation. I don't see it.
Well, if he said he lied about that shiny object, you know, did he also then spin a yarn about a silvercraft landing and there being some people walking about, you know, and stuff like that? Because
that's very possible. But especially when you're dealing with children, if you interview 62 children, you don't think one of those kids is going to say, "Well, Dallin told me this," or X, Y, and Z happened. 62 kids recounted the event, right, in similar fashion, with similar story, and drew similar pictures to each other. That just does not happen.
Yeah. I'm going to point out that this kid that decided to come clean, right? He was on camera 15 years earlier. I saw the interview describing the UFO as having lights that would flash different colors. So he's either lying or misremembering, right?
Right. Either way, his word does not go very far.
I want to point out a similar case that happened in 1966 at Westhull High School in Melbourne, Australia. Get this, up to 300 people, including teachers and students. What did they see? They saw a silver saucer-shaped craft. It landed in a field near the school. It landed on April 6th, 1966. Witnesses described a large craft surrounded by 4 or 5 smaller crafts that were flying around. The large one landed, okay? Now, within 45 minutes, the place was flooded with military. They threatened and intimidated people about not speaking to anyone. Typical MIB, Men in Black scenario here. And they roped off the area. They took Geiger counter readings, and you know, they did their whole thing that they usually do. You know, following, once again, Men in Black protocol. Maybe they even used those little zing, those deneuralizers.
Flashy thingies?
Neuralizers, actually. Yeah, right?
There you go.
Well, the kid said that it landed in a field with knee-high grass, and they actually did see a circular depression, and the grass was kind of spun like in your typical crop circle type of scenario, right? And in the center, there was a lot of burnt grass. Okay. Afterwards, the owner of the field said that he burned the field after they finished to kind of dissuade curious people from trespassing, right?
Okay.
It's pretty curious.
Yeah, it sounds very similar.
I mean, it's basically almost the same story, except this time we've got 300 people seeing this.
Yeah.
At a school. And I will point out one other commonality I noticed with unusual things here. You've got a case where aliens or an unknown entity or an unknown phenomenon is approaching children. Now, I noticed in several of our prior episodes, we're dealing with Bigfoots. They seem to be more comfortable interacting with people. Perfect example was the episode we did covering Ed and Lorraine Warren's encounter with a Bigfoot. She was called to this community because the Bigfoots in the area, people were concerned. They saw them interacting with the children. But the interaction was very positive. And as I recall, Lorraine Warren, using her psychic abilities, said she had a communication with the Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot said that it felt more comfortable talking to children because they would be more accepting and less likely, to just react emotionally
Right,
to
with
what they're
violence
seeing.
or anything. Yeah.
So I'm wondering whether this is another, maybe it was calculated. Maybe this landing was calculated because they wanted to make first contact with children.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
that's an interesting theory for sure.
Yeah.
They
I
would
think so.
definitely have an idea that, again, they're not going to be met with extreme violence immediately and horror,
Yeah, exactly. Well, if anybody has any insight or ideas about what happened in either case, please let us know and we'll feature it in an upcoming show. That wraps it up for now. For more, like and subscribe to America's Strangest History, where we drop new episodes every single week. I'll be back with Jimmy for another look into more of the strangest, weirdest stuff we can get our hands on. See you soon.